Hello people, welcome to Prep Elevate. So we are now starting with the CAT 2022 questions. Okay, I am starting with PARASUMMARY questions. So we have the first question on the screen, and just like I keep mentioning in all my VARC videos, if you have been watching them, the first idea is to do a bit of skimming, just help you understand what you are getting into. Okay, let's just start the process of skimming, and it goes without mentioning that you should try the questions on your own, come up with an answer, and then later come back and check those answers. Right? Okay. First word that I see here is petitioning. Okay, I see expeditious. Frequently, expressions, recruit citizens, rhetorical argument, contrast, okay, voters, choices, something about, let's say voting process maybe, because I've also found democracy here. The length of the options, pretty much balanced. I won't say very lengthy, I won't say very short sentences. They look good, right? Functioning, collective voice, political, democratic, कुछ तो democracy, political, agenda, something of this sort, citizens voting. Language looks fine, right? It's not too unfamiliar. कुछ ऐसा नहीं है जो हमें पता ही नहीं है इस बारे में, right? So it looks like a good question. Let's just read it in depth now. Okay. Petitioning is an expeditious democratic tradition used frequently in prior centuries by which citizens can bring issues directly to governments. Okay, they've defined petitioning here. Petitioning क्या होता है? What is the meaning of the word petition? Petition is when you make a formal request, usually to a body of law. ठीक है? That is petitioning. Now see, पहले sentence में ना you have a word probably which is not really that easy. Expeditious. ठीक है? The trick is not to stop. रुकना नहीं है हमें, पढ़ते जाना है. Ultimately we have to come up with the best summary. So maybe इस word का उतना utility नहीं होगा last में, तो यहाँ पे just रुकना नहीं है. Okay, that's first thing. पढ़ते जाना है. Later we'll come back and see कि इसका meaning क्या हो सकता है, context में क्या meaning हो सकता है. And just for your information, expeditious as a word means quick. Okay, जल्दी जल्दी, quickly and very efficiently when something happens, that is known as expeditious. Okay? Now what does the first line say? That petition as a process, it was used in prior centuries, and what did citizens do? They could raise their issues directly to government. Okay, वही basic definition है petitioning का. As expressions of collective voice, they support procedural democracy by shaping agendas. Okay, they matlab the process of petitioning, so they have become, they were used rather as expressions of collective voice. So when you had to take your issues to the government, you use the process of petitioning, and they were an indicator of collective voice. ठीक है? So आप अपनी बात उन तक पहुंचा सकते हो जो पावर में है, उसके लिए आप petitioning का यूज करते थे, right? They can also recruit citizens to causes, ठीक है, to solve problems, give voice to the voteless, ठीक है, so that is a way in which you exercise your power of democracy, probably. Voice to the voteless, people who cannot cast their vote but they have something to convey, so that is this giving voice to the voteless. And apply the discipline of rhetorical argument that clarifies a point of view. Rhetorical argument is when you use a point of reasoning. Okay, so basically when you use reasoning or argument to prove something to be true or false, right? So when you use logic to do that, so that is all, these are the let's say in ways in which petitioning was used: to recruit citizens to causes, lend your voice to a particular cause, give voice to the voteless, people who can't vote but they have something to say about it, petitioning के through उसको express किया जा सकता है. And apply the discipline of rhetorical argument, use logical reasoning to clarify a point of view. By contrast, मतलब यहाँ पे कुछ तो अलग होने वाला है, अब कुछ अलग के बारे में हम डिस्कस करेंगे, ठीक है? So by contrast, elections are limited in several respects. So we are comparing the process of petitioning to the process of election. So election में क्या होता है? They involve only a few candidates. Obviously कुछ ही लोग होते हैं जो election में रहते हैं. and thus fall far short of a representative democracy. Remember petitioning में हम collective voice की बात कर रहे थे, और उसके contrast में election में क्या होता है, the collective voice is not that great because the representation is only by a few people. ठीक है. Further, voters' choices are not specific to particular policies or laws, and elections are episodic. You don't have an election every other day, right? There is a tenure, fixed tenure. So उसमें elections होते हैं. Probably petitioning is a lot more comfortable or convenient that way. When you have to raise your, something important is going on, you have to raise your voice, you have to convey it to the voice of law, the people who are in power. But let's say election नहीं है उस time पे, है ना, तो वहाँ पे it becomes a little tedious when you have to wait for that 5-year long term or whatever the case might be. So that is why it is known as episodic, है ना. Whereas the voice of the people needs to be heard and integrated constantly into democratic government. So यहाँ पे ही petitioning और election में एक gap create हो जाता है. There's a difference, there is a contrast. So petitioning is collective voice, election not so, can't say that it is as per the passage. Okay, it's not a personal opinion. So democracy, again, it's not very representative of the collective voice because the representatives are very few in number. And then petitioning, probably is a lot more convenient because as and when an important issue it happens, you can raise your voice. But elections are episodic, they happen at regular intervals in regular episodes, and it is then that you can like express your opinion in favor or against something. That is what the passage says. And the last line says that the voice of the people needs to be integrated now and then. Okay, so which happens like seamlessly when it is petitioning, but for election that is not very true because you have to wait for that fixed tenure when elections happen, and then you take the voice of the masses into consideration. Okay, now before we jump into the answer choices, something that I keep mentioning about para summary, it is about comparative analysis. ठीक है, तो चार ऑप्शन में से जो एक करेक्ट ऑप्शन होता है, दैट इज कंपैरेटिवली अ बेटर वे ऑफ कैप्चरिंग द एसेंस ऑफ द पैराग्राफ. तो इसको ध्यान में रखना है. देयर आर ऑप्शंस दैट यू कैन रिजेक्ट राइट अवे, व्हिच हैपेंस. टू ऑप्शंस तो हमेशा यूजुअली रिजेक्ट हो जाते हैं बहुत इजीली. बिटवीन द टू चॉइसेस दैट यूजुअली वी गेट वेरी कंफ्यूज्ड अबाउट, वहां पे सिर्फ और सिर्फ एक कंपैरेटिव एनालिसिस की जरूरत होती है. ठीक है, बस इतना ध्यान में रखना है. अभी ऑप्शन ए, petitioning has been important to democratic functioning. ठीक है, that was given. It has been, as it supplements the electoral process by enabling ongoing engagement with the government. Now this was the last line, right? This was the last line, that the voice has to be integrated, the voice of the collective has to be integrated constantly into a democratic government, which is not possible when elections happen because they are episodic. But petitioning से वो solve हो सकता है. It supplements the electoral process. I don't find anything very wrong with this choice. I'm just waiting to compare it just to be sure. ठीक है. Next option, petitioning is definitely more representative of the collective voice. ठीक है, and the functioning of democratic government could improve if we relied more on petitioning rather than holding periodic elections. ये थोड़ा एक्सट्रीम नहीं हो गया? ये कहाँ पे लिखा था कि अगर petitioning, if we switch from democratic the way the election से अगर हम petitioning में switch करेंगे तो the functioning of democratic government could improve. ऐसा कहीं लिखा था क्या? ऐसा नहीं लिखा था ना. So this is just, I would say, an illusion that is created through options, although essence में लगता है कि that is what they are trying to say. They are trying to place petitioning as better over democracy, ऐसा लग रहा है. But we have to be very careful with choices कि ये ऑप्शन में मेंशन नहीं था. फर्स्ट ऑप्शन देखो, इट इज अ वेरी बैलेंस्ड अप्रोच, है ना. इट फॉलोज द टोनैलिटी ऑफ द पैसेज. It follows the tonality of the passage. This option straight away says petitioning over elections. Why? And it gives your reasons that we don't need to hold periodic elections, we can just roll with petitioning. ठीक है, तो ये थोड़ा ज़्यादा एक्सट्रीम हो जाता है. ठीक है. By giving citizens greater control over shaping political and democratic agendas, political petitions are invaluable as they represent an ideal form of representative democracy. फिर से बहुत ज़्यादा ये it's too extreme. कहाँ पे लिखा है कि ये ideal form है? ये तो अपने से लिखा गया है ना, वी वर जस्ट ट्राइंग टू कंपेयर टू डिफरेंट वेज, एक पिटिशनिंग वर्सेस इलेक्शन, बट किसी के फेवर में इतना स्ट्रांगली ओपिनियन एक्सप्रेस किया गया है क्या? नो, राइट? सो दैट इज वाई अगेन दैट इज आई एम नॉट गोइंग विद बी, आई एम नॉट गोइंग विद सी, बिकॉज ये अपने आप में बहुत एक्सट्रीम आंसर चॉइसेस है, ठीक है? टोन को मैच करना पड़ता है ना, यू टू मैच द टोन ऑफ द पैसेज विद द ऑप्शंस, ठीक? नाउ डी, citizens become less inclined to petitioning, ये कहाँ लिखा है? ये तो पहले the first few words itself, it's a turn off, red flag, as it enables vocal citizens to shape political agendas, but this needs to change to strengthen democracies today. This is straight away rejection, हाँ, ये तो consideration में आना भी नहीं चाहिए top 2 में. Only confusion that could occur is between A and B probably, because they are written in a similar sense, but वहाँ पे भी if you are careful you'll realize कि B has given you some illusion of information which is not there, है ना? It is crossing that ambit. So A is the correct answer. It is balanced, it captures the key points, and this option, that ongoing engagement, you need to integrate the voice of the people, this is perfectly mentioned in A. So A is the correct answer choice. What do we learn from this? First, good one to attempt under exam conditions, I would say, not very difficult. Second thing, the tonality of the option that you select should somehow match with the tonality of the passage. It cannot be very extremes. Okay? Third thing that we need to understand here is how are we rejecting options? Okay? How are we rejecting options? ये जानना जरूरी है. Okay? Now next question. फर्स्ट थिंग्स फर्स्ट, जैसे ही आप ये क्वेश्चन को देखते हो, लुक एट दिस वन, ये क्वेश्चन को आप देखो, देयर इज हार्डली एनी ब्रीदिंग स्पेस, है ना? बहुत ही ज़्यादा भरा हुआ लग रहा है, इट लुक्स पैक्ड, बट कंपेयर टू दिस वन looks like it has breathing space, है ना? So this is what I say, sentences are shorter, even the passage looks shorter comparatively. Options तो obviously like one line options लग रहे हैं. Now it could go two ways. Either we are looking at it like really objectively, so our guesses are perfectly right कि अच्छा this looks shorter, this looks manageable, so maybe this is an easier one to knock off. Second extreme could also be true. Just because it's shorter, it's very difficult to make sense. ठीक है, it does not have a lot of breathing space or playing around space, so जो भी लिखा हुआ it has to exactly translate. And also the topic is also very important. वहाँ पे we were reading something जो थोड़ा familiar था, यहाँ पे we might come across something which is not very familiar. So सिर्फ shorter sentences एक criteria नहीं हो सकते, it could be one of the criteria, है ना? So skimming, I'm just starting with the skimming process. Life hangs together. Whenever we talk about life, if we're talking about philosophies of life, tends to be a little difficult, है ना? Limited vision, inanimate objects, infinitesimal ways, okay, lot of ways, matlab stimuli, distinction, animate, inanimate, living non living के बीच में कुछ difference probably, subatomic particles, metaphysics, brains, something about awareness, cognizance probably, क्योंकि यहाँ पे words like metaphysics, brains, वहाँ से arbitrary distinctions, inanimate, animate, quantum physics, ठीक है, inanimate world, stimuli, inanimate. This animate inanimate thing is getting repeated over and over again, so something of this sort with a sprinkle of quantum physics. Skimming से मुझे यही पता लग रहा है, ठीक है? Let's understand. All that we think we know about life, how life hangs together, is really some kind of illusion that we have perpetrated on ourselves because of our limited vision. Very first line seems to open it up, opens the passage in a very philosophical manner, that you think you know how life hangs together. If yes, then that is an illusion, because all that we know is subjected or restricted to our limited vision of understanding, right? So that is the first line. What appears to be inanimate objects, such as stones, turn out not only to be alive in the same way that we are, but also in many infinitesimal ways to be affected by stimuli just as humans are. So the second line basically tries to expand, gives you an example that, why do I say that, why does the author feel that whatever we know is just, let's say, a tip of the iceberg. Okay, so they say that stones, which are inanimate, non-living objects, they are not only alive just like us, living things, humans, but they are also affected by stimuli. Okay, an external agent, they are also, they respond to stimuli probably, so they're affected by stimuli just like us humans. The distinction between animate, living, animate matlab living, something that is lively, living, and inanimate matlab non living, simply cannot be made when you enter the world of quantum mechanics. So when you step into the world of quantum mechanics, which is a branch of study, so you cannot really distinguish between what is living and non living, and try to determine how those apparent subatomic particles, of which you and everything else in our universe is composed, are all tied together. So you cannot really fathom is understand or make sense between living and non-living once you step into the world of quantum mechanics. And we are all made of particles is what we know. So all those subatomic particles that you and everything else in our universe is composed, they are all tied together. So basically, the constituent element is the same for all of us. Okay, subatomic particles. So you cannot really distinguish, very clearly distinguish between animate and inanimate once you step into the world of quantum mechanics. So when you look through the lens of quantum mechanics, that distinction appears to be blurred, right? The point is that physics and metaphysics show there is a pattern to the universe that goes beyond our capacity to grasp it with our brains. So there is definitely some pattern to the universe which we cannot really fathom, which we cannot really make sense of, we cannot grasp it with our brains. That is what physics and metaphysics go on to show. Okay, so basically what are we talking about in this paragraph? That whatever we know about life is an illusion. Distinction between inanimate and animate objects seem to disappear once you step in the world of quantum mechanics, and physics and metaphysics show that there is some pattern to the universe that we cannot really fathom. And also they have given the example of the stone to say that just like we are affected by stimuli, they are also affected by stimuli, and they're as living as we are. Okay, now options, remember, comparative analysis. Okay, arbitrary distinctions between inanimate and animate objects disappear at the scale at which quantum mechanics works. So yeah, this is what we've been discussing about, that the arbitrary matlab random distinctions. Okay, random, something that does not have logic, something that does not have a pattern to it. So that is random. So if you guys are familiar with the concept of probability, there's something known as random selection. Okay, that is arbitrary. Okay, there's no pattern guiding it. It happens in a very let's say in a fashion which cannot be explained through logic. Random fashion, arbitrary. Fine, I am okay with the information given with A. I'm just trying to compare it with the others to see if there is an option which better explains the essence. Now B, quantum physics indicates that an astigmatic view of reality, astigmatic मतलब क्या होता है, ठीक है, astigmatic actually there is a condition of the eye which is known as astigmatism, ठीक है, that is a defect of the eye. If you have that kind of defect, it actually affects your eye lens, and then you're not able to have a clear vision, or you tend to have a blurred vision. Okay, and metaphorically, if you have to say that you have an astigmatic view of reality, it means you have an unreal view. Okay, something that is not based on logic, it is unreal. Okay, unreal, astigmatic, metaphorically, huh? This is not very accurate. This is just to give you an understanding, which means unreal, or let's say something that is foggy or blurred. You could also say that is blurred. A blurred view of reality. So quantum physics indicates that an astigmatic view of reality, matlab an unreal or blurred view of reality, results in erroneous assumptions. Erroneous is incorrect, huh? Incorrect assumptions about the universe. Now the problem here is ये पूरा पैसेज वाज डिस्कसिंग अबाउट एनिमेट, इनएनिमेट एंड क्वांटम फिजिक्स, वो मुझे यहाँ पे दिखा नहीं ऑप्शन बी में. So basically जो keywords है ना, this एनिमेट एंड इनएनिमेट एंड दैट डिस्टिंक्शन वो ए में था बट वो बी में नहीं है, ठीक है. सो दैट इज व्हाई दिस इज नॉट अ वेरी गुड वे ऑफ लेट्स से capturing the essence. अब in absence of a probably I could have considered कि part of it is correct, ठीक है, but A के presence में ना B looks weaker, so that is why I'm rejecting B. हाँ, this is what I mean by comparative analysis, ठीक है. अभी एक चीज you guys keep asking how important is vocab for cat. Now see, there are no direct questions, you might have noted कि ऐसे they don't ask you synonyms and antonyms, but यहाँ पे जब आप आते हो ना, see if you don't know the meanings of these words and let's say these happen to be keywords, so here you are going to face a bit of trouble. So every time that you know when you are a cat aspirant, you're preparing for some competitive exam, make sure vocab gets some portion of your time of prep, ठीक है. Not because you have to directly face questions, but you have to like really understand contextually, you have to understand, and every word is not that easy that you know you're going to read it again and you'll be able to understand. थोड़ी you know your little bit of background work is needed, foundational bit, ठीक है. Okay, see, the inanimate world is both sentient and cognizant. Cognizant मतलब aware. When you have cognizance मतलब aware, awareness. Sentient is with the ability to sense and feel. The ability to sense and feel, ठीक है. Inanimate world is aware in a way that was mentioned that they are alive, they are aware, ठीक है. But the ability to sense and feel, I am not very sure. They respond to stimuli, they are affected by stimuli, but like do they sense and feel? Not very sure. Like its animate counterpart. एक और चीज है, there is no mention of quantum mechanics, which was also an important point of discussion, which I also found in A. So उस हिसाब से I am rejecting this, ठीक है. A part of it is missing, which I found in some other option. Now D, the effect of stimuli is similar in inanimate objects when compared to animate objects or living beings. This is just a part of the story, है ना. This was not the summary. This anybody could have rejected. This is just the part of the story, ठीक है. What are we left with? A. So always parasummary में comparative analysis. Now one thing to note, this was in terms of perception, like when you look at it visually, this looked like this could have been an easy take because sentences are shorter, but again the content was not that simple. You could have easily you know gotten confused somewhere, or rather the topic of discussion may not have been very interesting. So that is why I say only the length of the statement should not be the sole indicator to pick or reject a question. A little more analysis always helps. अभी third question देखते हैं. So CAT 2022 had 3 questions per slot of para summary, ठीक है. Now look at this. Skimming करते हैं सबसे पहले, like we start off. Okay, modern historians, medieval, okay, Africa, ignorant, history, probably history के ऊपर based है ये. Power dynamic, okay, traditional narrative stressed Ethiopia is weak, aggression, okay, real story buried in plain sight, modern scholars, okay, something I think they're trying to pick up something from history and give the opinion of scholars on that, probably, ठीक है. Recent research, richly connected, kings of Ethiopia sponsoring their own missions, okay. More or less looks like you know we are dealing with a little bit of history, something of something that has its roots in history and the perception of the scholars, probably, ठीक है. Options are dense, है ना. There are, see, 3 lines for option B. Options are dense, but the words look familiar. Promote, Ethiopia तो वहां से लिया गया है. अच्छा, एक cherry picked सी quotes are here, that is I'm like drawn to this word. Documented, establishing connections, illusions, ठीक है. I think looks like a fairly decent one. पढ़ते हैं डिटेल में. It's not that modern historians of medieval Africa have been ignorant about contacts between Ethiopia and Europe. They just had the power dynamic reversed. Okay, so the first line starts with a kind of थोड़ा सा accusation की जैसा है ना. It's not like modern historians of medieval Africa, they did not know about the contacts or connections between Ethiopia and Europe. Just probably chose to ignore it or interpret it in a different way or present it or narrate it in a different way, just had the power dynamic reversed. ठीक है? The traditional narrative, so what did they say? Traditionally क्या बोला जाता है? Stressed Ethiopia as weak. तो इथोपिया को एक वीक नेशन की तरह प्रेजेंट किया गया है इन द ट्रेडिशनल नरेटिव एंड इन ट्रबल in the face of aggression from external forces. So Ethiopia has been presented as a weak nation who are in, you know, in trouble when there is aggression, when there is violence, so violence from external forces. And that is why Ethiopia sought military assistance from their fellow Christians to the north. So they were probably dependent on, their neighbors from the north, their fellow Christians. So Europe, okay, Ethiopia and Europe. What was the connection like? So it is represented or explained in a way like Ethiopia was dependent on Europe to protect itself, right? It was a weak nation and dependent on Europe to protect itself in the face of aggression. But the real story, so there's a real story to it. Real story kya hai? Buried in plain sight in medieval diplomatic texts simply had not been put together by modern scholars. So the accusation is there is a real story and it is buried in plain sight. Buried in plain sight matlab kya hota hai? Something that is clearly visible but you choose to ignore it for obviously your own reasons. So that is buried in plain sight. So it's buried, so let's say under the surface, but in plain sight you can see it but you choose to ignore it. So that is the accusation probably from the author's end, that the real story is buried in plain sight. Everybody knows it, but then they choose to ignore it. That some other kind of connection also existed, not the one that is only traditionally explained. So what is the like the recent research? Recent research pushes scholars of medieval Europe to imagine a much more richly connected medieval world. At the beginning of the so-called age of exploration, there is evidence that the kings of Ethiopia were sponsoring their own missions of diplomacy, faith, and commerce. So, see, this is the flip side to it. How did we represent Ethiopia, or rather, how did we choose to represent Ethiopia? How it has been represented in the traditional text. Ethiopia is a weak nation dependent upon Europe to protect it in the face of aggression. But actually, what is the case? In the age of exploration, there is evidence to prove that they were doing well for themselves. In fact, they were sponsoring their own missions of diplomacy. That means they had good connections with their neighbors, good diplomatic connections, and commerce. Business happens when there is trust, when there is good connection. So they were actually, they were in a good space, but we represented them as weak and a dependent nation. ठीक है? So that is the contrast. अभी options देखेंगे. Not very difficult to understand the passage, right? But options में देखते हैं. Could it get tricky? Let's check. Medieval historical resources selectively promoted the narrative that powerful European forces were called on to protect weak African civilizations such as Ethiopia, but this is far from reality. Where is the problem happening? Although, information wise, this looks like a good answer choice. We actually, it is buried in plain sight. So there is a selective promotion of a particular kind of narrative, which is fine. But then it talks upon that this explanation, this selectively promoting the narrative happened with weak African civilizations such as Ethiopia. Do we have any other examples कि और nations के साथ भी ऐसा हुआ था? So we can't generalize, right? कि हर एक weak African nation को इसी तरह represent किया गया था. Ethiopia is the only example that we are dealing with. किसी और के साथ ऐसा हुआ नहीं हुआ? I don't know. That is outside the ambit of this passage. So just because they are mentioning this, right? This one portion, weak African nations such as Ethiopia, it does not qualify as a very strong choice, at least at first glance. No? But this could be one of the closest to the correct options. I'll just check. Okay, I'm keeping it on hold now. Now next, medieval texts have been cherry-picked to promote a view of Ethiopia as weak and in need of Europe's military help. यहाँ तक तो सही है. This is just exactly what we have read in the first few lines. With aggressive neighbors. But recent studies reveal that it was a well-connected and outward-looking culture. See, this is such a beautiful way of explaining. And A और B में आप compare करो, B only talks about Ethiopia, okay, not about other African civilizations who are weaker just like Ethiopia. So वहाँ पे ये correction हो चुका है. Cherry picked. Medieval texts have been cherry picked. Cherry picked मतलब क्या होता है? When you choose to pick something from a group that benefits you. So when you pick and choose your own share of opportunities, it could be items, it could be anything, something that benefits you. So that is what they have done, right? That's selective picking. So cherry picked वहाँ पे, and they have represented Ethiopia as weak, in need of Europe's assistance and help. But recent studies reveal it was a well-connected nation. Remember, they had good diplomacy ties, own missions of diplomacy. They could sponsor their own missions of diplomacy. That good commercial relations also looks like a good one, huh? So abhi ke liye this A I can reject because I found something better now. Abhi C, medieval texts have documented how strong connections between the Christian communities of Ethiopia and Europe were invaluable in establishing military and trade links. ये तो पूरा ही गलत जा रहा है. This can never be the summary. This is not what we were talking about. We're not talking about trade relations. That was one aspect कि Ethiopia could self-sponsor, but this was not the key idea. ये तो instant rejection होगा. This is not what we are talking about. ठीक है, this is part of the story. Historians were under the illusion that Ethiopia needed military protection from their neighbors, but in fact the country had close commercial and religious connections with them. Historians were not under any kind of illusion. They cherry picked. They decided to promote that narrative. They were not under any kind of illusions. Okay? So this is not right. What is the correct one? Option B. This is a good question, and yes, there is scope for confusion to happen without an iota of doubt. That is actually how the options are designed. बहुत easy हो जाएगा तो it becomes a cakewalk. So दो options तो हमेशा ही ऐसे मिलेंगे, which will actually get you confused. That is the idea. That is why you should be practicing more and more questions. Comparative analysis for parasummary, always, always, always. That's the only thing that you should be focusing on. Second, focus on the language. The tonality of the passage should match the tonality of the options. That is also something that we learned today. Okay? So that's it for today's video. We discussed 3 questions from CAT 22 slot 1. We'll discuss the other questions as well in the later videos, and you guys keep practicing. Thank you so much.